Hello everyone, and welcome to Whispering Woods. I'm here to help you unwind tonight, to slow your breathing, clear your thoughts, and drift into calm. Find a comfortable place, let the world outside fade, and just listen. Before we begin, if stories like this help you find a little peace at the end of the day, feel free to like this video and subscribe to Whispering Woods. It lets these quiet tales keep finding the ones who need them. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? The evening settles like a soft blanket across your shoulders, familiar and warm. Outside, the world continues its endless turning. But here, in this quiet moment, there is only stillness. Light filters through windows you cannot see, golden and gentle, painting the air with amber. You can almost taste the coolness of twilight, feel the weight of the day lifting from your chest. Your breathing slows without effort, each exhale longer than the last, as if you're learning a rhythm you've always known but had forgotten. The tension in your jaw releases, your hands unfold, and somewhere deep within, something that has been clenched tight for too long finally lets go. I arrived at Mercy Point Lighthouse on a Tuesday in late September, when the sea was gray and the sky was grayer still, and the line between them had blurred into a single sheet of pearl. The boat that brought me motored away quickly, the captain eager to beat the weather back to the mainland, and I stood on the small dock with my 2 suitcases and a box of supplies, watching the vessel shrink into the mist. The lighthouse rose from black rocks like a finger pointing at nothing. White paint peeling in long strips. The glass room at the top dark and vacant as a dead eye. A narrow path of crushed shells led from the dock to the keeper's cottage. A small structure of weathered wood tucked against the base of the tower. The wind carried the smell of salt and kelp, and something else, something older, like stone that has been wet for centuries. I had taken the position on short notice. The previous keeper had left without explanation, according to the harbor master who'd arranged my passage. The lighthouse was automated now, had been for years, but someone still needed to be present, to monitor the equipment, to file reports, to serve as a point of contact if anything went wrong. It was a lonely posting, the harbor master had warned, but the pay was adequate and the cottage was rent-free. 6 months, maybe a year. However long I could stand it, I needed the solitude. That's what I told myself as I carried my bags up the shell path, as I fumbled with the key the harbor master had given me, as I pushed open the cottage door and stepped into a smell of dust and damp wool. I needed time away from the noise of the world, from the constant press of other people's needs and expectations. Here, on this rock, I would have nothing but time and silence and the endless rhythm of the waves. The cottage was small, but adequate. A main room with a kitchen along one wall and a wood stove in the corner. A bedroom barely large enough for the narrow bed it contained. A bathroom with a rust-stained sink and a shower that groaned when I turned the tap. Everything was old but functional, worn smooth by years of use by keepers I would never meet. I unpacked quickly, putting clothes in the small dresser, setting my few books on the windowsill, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom cabinet. The act of organizing my possessions gave me something to focus on, kept my mind from dwelling on how far I was from anything familiar. How complete the isolation was. When I'd finished, I made myself a cup of tea with the supplies I'd brought and sat at the small table, looking out the window at the lighthouse tower. It stood perhaps 50 yards from the cottage, connected by a covered walkway that looked like it had been added as an afterthought. The tower itself was maybe 60 feet tall, built of stone and covered in that peeling white paint. The light room at the top was ringed with windows, and even from here I could see smudges on the glass, salt spray, and bird droppings that no one had cleaned in months. I would need to go up there, I knew, to check the equipment, to familiarize myself with the systems. But not today. Today I would settle in, would learn the rhythms of this place, would begin the process of adjusting to a life measured not in hours and appointments, but in tides and weather. The evening came early, the gray sky darkening to charcoal and then to black. I lit the lamps in the cottage. There was electricity, but it was unreliable, the harbor master had said, so I should keep the oil lamps ready. I made myself a simple dinner from canned goods, ate it slowly, washed the dishes in the small sink. The cottage creaked around me, settling into the night, and I tried to find the sounds comforting rather than unsettling. At some point, I noticed that the lighthouse was dark. The beacon should have been rotating, casting its beam across the water, but the light room remained black. I stood at the window, staring up at it, waiting to see if perhaps it was on a timer that hadn't engaged yet. But the darkness continued, absolute and unbroken. I should go check it, I thought. That was my job after all, to maintain the light. But the thought of crossing that walkway in the dark, of climbing the spiral stairs inside the tower, of standing in that glass room high above the rocks, it filled me with a reluctance I couldn't quite name. Tomorrow, I told myself. I'd check it first thing tomorrow when there was daylight. I went to bed early, exhausted from travel and the weight of newness, of beginning something I wasn't certain I was prepared for. The narrow bed was harder than I expected, the blankets thin and smelling of mothballs. But I was tired enough that sleep came quickly, pulling me down into darkness deeper than the sea. I woke to absolute silence, not the normal silence of a quiet night, but something more complete. An absence of sound so total it seemed to press against my eardrums, to fill the room like a physical presence. I lay very still, listening, and heard nothing. Not wind, not waves, not the cottage settling or the distant cry of seabirds. Nothing. I sat up slowly, my heart beginning to beat faster, though I couldn't have said why. The darkness in the room was complete. No moonlight through the window, no ambient glow from any source. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table, found the matches, struck one. The small flame seemed impossibly bright in the blackness, and in its light I could see my breath misting in the suddenly cold air. I lit the lamp, and the warm glow pushed back the darkness just enough to reveal the room around me. Everything looked normal. The same furniture, the same walls, but the quality of the silence remained, oppressive and strange, as if I'd gone deaf or the world outside had simply stopped. I got out of bed, pulling the blanket around my shoulders against the cold, and moved to the window. Outside, the darkness was complete. No stars, no moon, not even the faint luminescence of sea foam on the rocks. Just blackness, absolute and unbroken, pressed against the glass like something solid. And then I saw it. A light in the lighthouse. Not the rotating beacon, but something else. A warm, flickering glow, like candlelight or firelight, moving behind the windows of the light room. As I watched, it moved from one window to the next, as if someone was walking around the interior of that glass-walled chamber, carrying a light source, examining something. My first thought was relief. Someone else was here. The previous keeper, perhaps, or a maintenance worker I hadn't been told about. But that relief lasted only a moment before being replaced by something else, because no one had mentioned another person being on the island, because no boat had arrived since the one that brought me. The light moving in that tower had a quality that reminded me of something old. Something from a time before electric bulbs and automated systems. I stood at the window for what might have been minutes or hours. Time had become strange in that absolute silence, watching the light move through the tower's glass room. It would pause at one window, as if whoever held it was looking out at the dark sea, then move to the next, then the next, making a slow circuit of the space. Over and over, the same pattern, the same measured pace. Eventually, the light descended. I could track its progress downward through the tower by the faint glow that appeared and disappeared in the narrow windows of the spiral staircase. Down and down it went until it reached the base of the tower, and then it moved into the covered walkway. It was coming toward the cottage. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering now. The blanket pulled tight around me. The light moved steadily down the walkway, visible through the small windows along its length, growing closer with each second. I should do something, I thought. Call out, or light another lamp, or... The light stopped. It had reached the end of the walkway, the point where the door would open into the cottage. I could see the glow beneath the door that led from my main room into the passage. And there it stayed, unmoving, as if whatever carried it had paused just on the other side of that thin wooden barrier. I waited, my breath shallow, my body rigid with tension. The glow remained constant. No sound came from the other side of the door. No knock, no footsteps, no voice calling out. Just that steady, patient light, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, I found my voice. "Hello?" I called out, and the word sounded strange in that oppressive silence, flat and absorbed, as if the air itself was swallowing sound. No response, just the light, waiting. "Is someone there?" I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that glow beneath the door. Eventually, slowly, it began to dim. Not moving away, not retreating, but simply fading, growing weaker and weaker until it was gone entirely, and I was left in the lamplight of my cottage, alone again with the silence. Gradually, the silence began to break. First, the distant sound of waves against rocks, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. Then, the creak of the cottage settling. Then, finally, the whisper of wind around the eaves. The world returned, sound by sound, until everything seemed normal again, as normal as a lighthouse cottage on a rock in the middle of the sea could be. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat at the table with my lamp burning, watching the door to the walkway, waiting for the light to return. It didn't. When gray dawn finally began to lighten the windows, I felt relief so profound it made my hands shake. In the morning light, everything seemed less strange. The cottage was just a cottage, old and worn but ordinary. The lighthouse was just a lighthouse, its white paint peeling, its light room reflecting the pale sky. The covered walkway was just a passage between two buildings, nothing more. I made myself breakfast, forcing down food I didn't want, trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced had been a dream, or the disorientation of my first night in an unfamiliar place, or some trick of fatigue and darkness. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. The light in the tower, the movement through the glass room, the patient waiting on the other side of the door. After breakfast, I made myself walk to the lighthouse. The day was overcast but bright enough, and the walk down the shell path and through the covered passage felt almost normal. The door to the tower opened with a push, the hinges groaning, and I stepped into the circular base room. It was empty. Stone walls, a few old crates in one corner, and the spiral staircase winding up into darkness. No sign that anyone had been here recently. No footprints in the dust on the floor, no marks or disturbances of any kind. Just emptiness and the smell of old stone and sea damp. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the metal railing, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The stairs wound around and around, and my legs began to ache from the climb. Small windows appeared at intervals, offering glimpses of gray sky and grayer sea, and I counted them as I passed, giving myself a rhythm to focus on. At the top, I emerged into the light room. It was a circular space, perhaps 15 feet across, ringed entirely with windows that looked out in all directions. In the center stood the beacon mechanism, a complex arrangement of lenses and motors and bulbs, all coated in a fine layer of dust. Control panels lined one section of the wall, their analog gauges and switches looking hopelessly outdated. I moved around the space slowly, my feet scuffing in the dust on the floor, examining the equipment. Everything looked functional, but neglected. I checked the controls, found the main power switch, and flipped it. After a moment's hesitation, the mechanism hummed to life. The beacon beginning its slow rotation, sending its beam out across the water in a steady sweep. The room was otherwise empty. No chairs, no desk, no personal items left behind by previous keepers. Just the machinery and the windows and the vast view of endless water stretching to a horizon I could barely distinguish from the sky. I stood there for a long time, watching the beacon rotate, trying to see any sign of the light I'd witnessed in the night. But there was nothing. Just dust and old equipment and the eternal sea. If stories like this calm your thoughts, you're home here in Whispering Woods. I descended the stairs more slowly than I'd climbed them, my mind working through possibilities, trying to find explanations that made sense. By the time I reached the base of the tower, I'd almost convinced myself that the previous night had been some sort of waking dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the strangeness of the new environment. Almost, the days that followed established themselves into a routine. I woke with the gray dawn, made breakfast, checked the weather instruments mounted outside the cottage, and filed my reports using the ancient radio transmitter in the cottage's back room. I walked the perimeter of the small island, checking for debris or damage, counting seabirds, watching the way the light changed on the water. I read my books, cooked my simple meals, maintained the equipment. The work was minimal, the days long, and I found myself falling into the rhythm of the place, my thoughts slowing, my connection to the mainland, and all its urgencies fading like a signal lost to distance. But every night, I waited. I would sit at my table after dark, a lamp burning, my eyes on the lighthouse tower, watching for the light. And most nights, nothing happened. The tower remained dark except for the rotating beacon, and I would eventually go to bed, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. But on some nights, maybe one night in 3, with no pattern I could discern, the light would appear, always the same, a warm, flickering glow in the glass room, moving from window to window with that measured, patient pace. Then the slow descent through the tower, visible in the stairwell windows. Then the progression down the covered walkway, steady and unhurried, until it reached the door to my cottage. And there it would stop, that glow visible beneath the door, waiting. I never opened the door. Something kept me from it, some instinct deeper than curiosity or logic. Instead, I would sit at my table, watching that band of light, waiting for it to fade. And eventually, after what felt like hours but might have been minutes, time moved strangely on those nights. The light would dim and disappear, and the normal sounds of the world would return, and it would be alone again. I tried to understand it. I looked for patterns in when it appeared, but found none. Some nights were calm, some were stormy, some were at the new moon, some near full. The light came when it came, following no schedule I could determine. I thought about leaving. I could radio for a boat, could claim illness or emergency, could be off this rock and back on the mainland in a few hours. But something kept me here. Partly it was stubbornness. I'd never been one to run from things I didn't understand. Partly it was curiosity. What was the light? And what did it want? If it wanted anything at all. And partly it was something else. Something I was less willing to admit. A feeling that I was meant to be here. That there was something I needed to see or understand or experience. The weeks passed, and I grew accustomed to my strange companion. The light became almost normal, another part of the rhythm of this place, like the tides or the crying of gulls. I stopped being afraid of it. Instead, I found myself waiting for it, looking forward to its visits in a way I couldn't quite explain. On one night in early November, when the wind was howling and rain was lashing the cottage in horizontal sheets, the light appeared as it sometimes did. I watched it move through the glass room, watched it descend the tower, watched it progress down the walkway. But this time, when it reached the door, something was different. The glow beneath the door was brighter, more insistent, and with it came a sound. Faint at first, barely audible over the storm, but growing clearer. A tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap. A pause. Then again. Tap, tap, tap. I stood from my chair, my heart beginning to race again with something like the fear I'd felt that first night. The tapping continued, patient and steady, and I realized it was a pattern. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Over and over. I approached the door slowly, drawn forward despite my reluctance. I stood before it, close enough to see the grain in the old wood, close enough to feel a coldness radiating from the other side. The tapping continued. I asked, and my voice was steadier than I expected. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was profound, deeper than the storm sounds outside. And then, so faintly I almost missed it, I heard something else. A voice? A whisper. I couldn't be certain, but it seemed to be saying something, a word or phrase repeated over and over, too quiet to distinguish. I leaned closer to the door, my ear nearly touching the wood, straining to hear. The whisper continued, maddeningly unclear. Like trying to understand someone speaking in another room, through walls and distance. And then I understood, not the words themselves, but their rhythm. They matched the tapping. 3 syllables, repeated over and over. 3 taps, 3 whispered syllables. A pattern that felt familiar in a way I couldn't place. I stepped back from the door, my mind working. 3 syllables, 3 taps, and suddenly I knew what they were. A name. Someone was whispering a name on the other side of that door. But whose name? Not mine, the syllables didn't match. Someone else's then. Another keeper, perhaps. Someone who had stood where I was standing, who had heard this same whisper, who had. The light began to fade. The whisper grew quieter, drawn out and distorted as it diminished, until both were gone, and I was left alone with the storm and my racing thoughts. I spent the rest of that night searching the cottage. I went through every drawer, every cabinet, every box and crate and forgotten corner. I was looking for records, for logs, for any documentation of the keepers who had come before me. Surely there would be something, some history of who had tended this light, who had lived in this cottage, who had stood watch on this lonely rock. I found nothing. The cottage had been stripped of personal effects, of any sign that people had lived here before me. No photographs, no journals, no names carved into door frames or written on walls. Just the furniture and the equipment and the endless, anonymous presence of the sea. You're listening to Whispering Woods, where every night brings another quiet tale. As November deepened into December, the weather worsened. Storms rolled in from the Atlantic with increasing frequency. Great systems that battered the island for days at a time, waves crashing against the rocks with enough force to shake the cottage, wind screaming around the tower like something alive and angry. I spent long hours inside, listening to the storm, watching through salt-streaked windows as the sea threw itself against my small refuge. The light came more frequently now. Not every night, but close to it. And each time, it lingered longer at my door. The tapping more insistent, the whisper more distinct. I still couldn't make out the name it was saying, but I was beginning to recognize the voice itself. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was simply a voice, patient and persistent, trying to communicate something I couldn't quite grasp. I began talking back. I don't know what made me start. Loneliness, perhaps, or simple curiosity, or the need to feel less like I was going mad in this isolated place. Whatever the reason, on one night when the light came and the tapping started, I spoke to it. "I hear you," I said to the door. "I don't understand what you're saying, but I hear you." The tapping stopped. The whisper paused. And then, slowly, it began again, but different this time. Slower, more deliberate, as if whoever was speaking was making an effort to be clearer. I still couldn't understand the words, but I could hear the effort, could sense the urgency behind them. Someone, something was trying very hard to tell me something, and I was failing to comprehend. "I'm sorry," I said. "I want to understand, but I can't hear you clearly. Can you—" I paused, feeling foolish. "Can you try something else?" The whisper stopped. The light beneath the door pulsed once, twice, 3 times, like a signal. And then something new happened. The tapping began again, but this time it wasn't random. It was structured, rhythmic, purposeful. Morse code. I'd learned it years ago, in a previous life that felt impossibly distant now, and the knowledge came back slowly as I listened. 3 taps, quick. 3 taps, slower. 3 quick, again. S-O-S. Then a pause, and then letters, spelled out slowly, deliberately, in the old code. R-E-A-D. Read what? I looked around the cottage, at the books on my windowsill, at the bare walls. "Read what?" I asked aloud. The tapping came again. L-O-G-B-O-O-K. Logbook. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The lighthouse logbook, where keepers recorded weather, ship sightings, maintenance, the daily details of their watch. I'd been filing my own reports electronically, had never thought to look for a physical log. "Where?" I asked. "TOWER." I looked toward the door that led to the walkway, to the lighthouse beyond. The light on the other side pulsed again, brighter this time, and I understood what it wanted, what it needed. For me to go to the tower, to find the logbook, to read whatever was written there. "Now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The light pulsed once. Yes, I stood there, weighing my options. It was late, well past midnight. The storm was still raging outside, though it had diminished somewhat from its earlier fury. Every instinct I had said to stay inside, to wait for daylight, to not follow a mysterious light into a dark tower in the middle of a winter storm. But I'd been here long enough to know that instincts could be wrong, that the world operated on rules I didn't fully understand, that sometimes the only way forward was through the fear. I put on my heavy coat, took the oil lamp from the table, and opened the door. The light on the other side had retreated, was already moving back down the walkway toward the tower. I followed, my lamp casting wild shadows on the walls, the wind howling through gaps in the covered passage, carrying spray that stung my face. The light ahead moved steadily, patient, waiting when I fell behind, proceeding when I caught up. At the tower door, it stopped. I pushed through into the circular base room, and the light began to ascend the stairs. I followed, climbing the spiral staircase with my lamp held high, my free hand on the cold metal railing. Up and up we went, the light always ahead, but never so far that I lost sight of it, until we emerged into the glass room at the top. The beacon was rotating as always, its beam sweeping across the storm-tossed sea. But the light I'd been following had moved to the far side of the room, to a section of wall I'd barely noticed before. It hovered there, pulsing gently, illuminating what I'd somehow missed on my previous visits. A cabinet, small, built into the wall itself, painted the same white as everything else, nearly invisible. The light pulsed again, and I understood. I crossed the room, set my lamp down carefully, and opened the cabinet door. Inside, stacked neatly, were logbooks, dozens of them, leather-bound and salt-stained, dating back decades. I pulled out the topmost one, the most recent, and opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was neat, precise, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore. It was dated 3 months before my arrival. The entry was brief. September 12th. Weather clear. Beacon functioning. No ships sighted. The light came again tonight. It knows my name now. It has been calling me for weeks, and I can no longer bear it. I am leaving at first light. Whoever comes next, forgive me for not warning you. But would you have believed me? Would anyone? The light means no harm, I think. It only wants to be heard. But I am not strong enough to hear it. I am not brave enough to understand what it is trying to tell me. Perhaps you will be. The answer is in the old logs. In the beginning. Read them, if you dare. But be warned, once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you see, you cannot unsee. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Thomas Ashford. I stood there, holding the logbook, my hands trembling slightly. Thomas Ashford, the previous keeper, the one who had left without explanation. He'd seen it too, the light, had heard the tapping, the whisper, had been called by it just as I was being called. The light hovered nearby, patient, waiting. I looked at it directly for the first time, really looked. trying to see what it was, but there was nothing to see except the light itself, warm and flickering, without source or substance, simply there. "You want me to read the old logs?" I said. It wasn't a question. The light pulsed once. Yes. I turned back to the cabinet, pulled out the oldest logbook I could find, its leather cover cracked and stained, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it to the first entry. The date was 1847. The handwriting was different, more elaborate, the style of another era, and the words, when I began to read them, changed everything. June 1st, 1847. This is the first entry in the log of Mercy Point Lighthouse, and God willing, it will be the first of many years of faithful service. My name is Samuel Oakes, and I have been appointed keeper of this light. I am accompanied by my wife, Catherine, and our daughter, Eliza, age 7. We arrived today by charter boat, and have established ourselves in the keeper's cottage. The lighthouse itself is a marvel of modern engineering, and I take great pride in my new position. Catherine is less enthusiastic about our isolation, but I trust she will adjust in time. Eliza is delighted with the seabirds, and has already begun collecting shells from the beach. We are grateful for this opportunity, and pray that we may serve well the ships that pass in the night. I turned the page, read the next entries. They were routine. At first, weather reports, ship sightings, minor maintenance notes, the ordinary log of a lighthouse keeper doing his duty. But as the weeks progressed, I began to notice changes in the tone. August 15th, 1847. Catherine has been having difficulty sleeping. She says she hears voices at night, whispering beneath the sound of the waves. I hear nothing myself, but I have promised to investigate. Eliza seems unaffected and continues her cheerful exploration of the island. September 3rd, 1847. The whispers continue, or so Catherine claims. She has grown withdrawn, spending long hours in the cottage, refusing to accompany me to the tower. Eliza has begun acting strangely as well, speaking of a friend who visits her at night, though we are the only souls on this rock. October 12th, 1847. I can no longer deny what Catherine has been saying. I hear them now as well. The whispers. They come from everywhere and nowhere, words I cannot quite distinguish, speaking in voices that sound almost familiar. Catherine says they are calling our names. I have not yet heard my own, but I fear it is only a matter of time. The entries grew more disturbed, more fragmented. Samuel Oakes wrote of lights in the tower that appeared when the lamp was extinguished, of footsteps in the night, of his daughter claiming that her friend wanted to show her something. His handwriting became less steady, the entries less regular. And then, in early November, the final entry. November 8th, 1847. I have made a terrible discovery. In searching the cottage for some explanation of these phenomena, I found a journal hidden beneath a floorboard. It belonged to the lighthouse contractor, written during the construction of this tower. He writes of the difficulty they had laying the foundation, of the resistance they encountered from the rock itself. And he writes of what they found when they blasted through to create a stable base, a chamber. Natural or carved, he could not say, but ancient beyond measure. And in that chamber, something that should not have been there. He does not describe it clearly, perhaps he could not, or would not. But he writes that they sealed the chamber, poured the foundation over it, built the tower atop it to hold it down. He writes that it was a mistake, that they should have filled it in completely, that they should have built elsewhere. But the contract was signed, the money spent, and so they finished the work and said nothing. And now we live atop it, Catherine and Eliza and I, atop this thing that was sealed away for good reason. The whispers are not random. They are deliberate. It is trying to communicate, to be released, the entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. I turned the page, but it was blank. I flipped through the rest of the logbook. Nothing. Just empty pages, yellowed and water-stained, but empty of words. I looked up at the light, which hovered nearby, patient as always. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd read. There was something beneath the lighthouse, something that had been there long before the tower was built, something that the workers had discovered and sealed away, and somehow it was still there, still aware, still trying to communicate. The whispers, the light, the calling of names, it all made a horrible kind of sense. "The chamber," I said to the light. "You're in the chamber beneath the tower." The light pulsed once, brighter. "Yes. And you want to be released?" The light dimmed slightly, and I sensed hesitation. Then it began to pulse in a pattern. Not Morse code this time, but something else. A rhythm that felt like disagreement, like correction, not released. Something else. But what? If your eyes are growing heavy, that's how you know you're safe here. Safe in whispering woods. I spent the rest of that night in the glass room, reading through the other logbooks by the light of my lamp and the patient glow of the presence that hovered nearby. The logs told a consistent story. Every keeper who had stayed long enough eventually heard the whispers, saw the light. Some left quickly, as Thomas Ashford had. Others stayed, trying to understand, trying to communicate. But none had succeeded in understanding what the presence wanted, what it needed, except one. In a logbook from 1923, I found an entry by a keeper named Margaret Chen. She had served at Mercy Point for 5 years, an unusually long tenure, and her entries were thoughtful and detailed. She wrote about the presence with neither fear nor dismissal, but with careful observation and growing understanding. March 14th, 1923. I have been conducting an experiment of sorts with the phenomenon that inhabits this place. Rather than fleeing when the light appears, I have been attempting to communicate with it, to understand its purpose. I believe I have made progress. The presence is not malevolent, as some previous keepers seemed to fear. Rather, it is lonely. It has been sealed away for so long that it has forgotten what it was, what it is meant to do. It calls our names because it is trying to remember what it means to have a name, to have an identity. It is trying to remember itself. April 3rd, 1923. The presence has been more active since I began truly engaging with it. Last night, it led me to the base of the tower, to a section of the foundation where the stone is different from the rest. I believe this is where the sealed chamber lies, just beneath my feet. The presence wants me to understand something about this place, about what it was before the tower was built, but I lack the knowledge to interpret what it is trying to show me. May 21st, 1923. I have made a discovery. In researching the history of this island at the mainland library, I found references to it in old maritime records. Before it was Mercy Point, it had another name. The sailors called it Memoria, the Island of Memory. There are fragments of stories, legends really, that speak of it as a place where the sea kept its memories, where the souls of drowned sailors would gather to remember their lives before returning to the deep. The presence is not something trapped. It is something that belongs here. It is the keeper of memory, and we built our tower on top of its home. June 15th, 1923. I understand now what it wants. Not release, but recognition. Not freedom, but remembrance. It calls our names because that is what it does. It remembers. It holds the names of every soul that has passed near these waters, every keeper who has tended this light, every sailor who has seen our beacon and been guided safely home. It is lonely because we have forgotten it, sealed it away, treated it as something to be feared rather than honored. Tonight, I will try something different. I will speak its name, if I can find it. The entries after that became sporadic, and Margaret Chen's handwriting grew less steady, as if written in haste or exhaustion. But the final entry was clear. July 4th, 1923. I have found it. The true name of this place, the name of what dwells beneath. It is written in the oldest records, in a language I cannot read but can somehow understand. Tonight, when the presence comes, I will speak the name. I will acknowledge it for what it is. If I am right, if I truly understand, then perhaps the whispers will stop, not because the presence will leave, but because it will finally be seen. I am not afraid. I am honored to be the one who remembers. M.C. There were no more entries in that logbook. I searched through the subsequent years, looking for any mention of what had happened to Margaret Chen, but found nothing. The next keeper's log began 6 months later, with no reference to his predecessor, as if she had simply vanished into the mist. I sat in the glass room as dawn began to gray the windows. The logbooks spread around me, the presence's light still hovering patiently nearby. The storm had passed while I read, and now the sea stretched calm and silver under a pale sky. Everything felt suspended, waiting. "You're the keeper of memory," I said to the light. "You remember every name, every soul that passes. That's what you do. That's what you've always done." The light pulsed, warm and steady. Yes. And Margaret Chen understood that. She found your name. Another pulse. Yes. But she never wrote it down. She never told anyone. The light dimmed slightly, and I felt sadness emanate from it, a loneliness so profound it made my chest ache. "Because she's gone," I continued, understanding dawning. "And with her went the knowledge of your name. You've been trying to tell every keeper since, trying to make them understand, but no one has listened long enough. No one has read the logs. No one has cared." The light brightened again, and I felt something like gratitude, like relief. Finally someone understood. "I can't read the old language," I said. "I can't find your name the way she did. But I can do something else. I can remember you. I can acknowledge you. I can make sure you're not forgotten again." The light began to pulse in a rhythm that felt like agreement, like hope, and then it moved, gliding across the glass room to hover over the logbook I'd been reading, Margaret Chen's journal of her final months. I picked it up, opened it to a page near the end, and there, in the margin, written so small I'd almost missed it, was a word. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, but somehow I knew how to pronounce it. The syllables formed in my mind, ancient and strange and beautiful. I spoke the name aloud. The sound of it filled the glass room, resonated in the stone of the tower, echoed out across the water. The light blazed suddenly brighter, so bright I had to shield my eyes, and then it began to change. The formless glow took on shape and substance, becoming something I could almost see clearly, almost understand. A figure made of light and memory, tall and patient and impossibly old, standing in the center of the end room. And then it spoke, not in whispers or tapping, but in a voice clear and resonant, like waves breaking on ancient shores. "Thank you," it said. "Thank you for remembering." The presence began to fade, not disappearing but settling, becoming less visible but somehow more present, as if it had finally found the right way to exist in this world. The desperate urgency was gone, replaced by a quiet peace. "I will stay," I said, and I meant it. "I'll tend the light, and I'll remember you. I'll make sure anyone who comes after me knows you're here, knows what you are. You won't be forgotten again." The presence pulsed one final time, warm and grateful, and then it faded into the background of the world, still there but no longer demanding attention, no longer struggling to be seen. It had been acknowledged. It had been named. It could rest. I descended the tower as the sun rose fully over the horizon, painting the sea gold and rose. The world felt different somehow, lighter, as if some great weight had been lifted. When I reached the cottage, I made myself breakfast and sat at my table, looking out at the lighthouse tower. It stood white and solid against the morning sky, its beacon turned off now that daylight had come, and I felt a deep contentment settle over me. This was my place now. Not just a job, not just a temporary refuge, but a home. I was the keeper of the light, and the keeper of the keeper, the one who would remember and be remembered. Before you drift off, remember to follow Whispering Woods for tomorrow's story. The months that followed fell into a new rhythm. I tended the lighthouse, filed my reports, maintained the equipment, but I also kept the old tradition alive. Each evening, I would write in the logbook, not just the official weather and ship sightings, but notes about the presence, about the island, about the memories that seemed to gather here like morning mist. The presence no longer appeared as a light moving through the tower. Instead, it manifested in subtler ways. A warmth in the air on cold nights, a sense of companionship when I sat alone at my table. Sometimes, when the wind was right, I would hear something that might have been a voice, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. But that felt like comfort, like recognition. I began to research the island's history more thoroughly, requesting books and documents from the mainland library, piecing together the story of this place. I learned that Memoria had been considered sacred by the indigenous peoples who had fished these waters long before Europeans arrived. They had believed it was a threshold place, where the boundary between this world and the next grew thin, where those who were lost could find their way home. The lighthouse builders had known nothing of this when they chose the site. They saw only a rocky outcropping in a strategic position, perfect for guiding ships through dangerous waters. They had no way of knowing they were building on holy ground, sealing away something that should have remained open, accessible, honored. But perhaps, I thought, the lighthouse had served the same purpose in its own way. It, too, was a beacon for the lost, a guide home through darkness. Perhaps the presence and the light were not so different after all. Both keepers, both remembering, both watching over those who traveled through the night. Winter deepened and then began its slow retreat. The storms grew less frequent, the days gradually longer. I celebrated New Year's alone in the cottage, raising a glass to the presents, to the keepers who had come before, to the strange and beautiful solitude of this place. In February, on a night when the northern lights danced green and silver across the sky, I had a visitor. Not the presence that was always there, a constant companion now, but something else. I was sitting at my table, writing in the logbook, when I felt a chill in the air and looked up to see a figure standing near the door. It was translucent, barely visible, a woman in old-fashioned clothing with her hair pulled back in a bun. She looked at me with eyes that held both sadness and peace, and I knew immediately who she was. "Margaret Chen," I said. She nodded, a slight smile crossing her face. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through tall grass, gentle and barely there. "You found it," she said. "You spoke the name." "You left it for someone to find," I replied, "in the margin of your log. You knew someone would eventually read it, eventually understand." "I hoped," she said. "I couldn't bear to write it clearly, to make it too easy. The name has power, and it should only be spoken by someone who truly understands what it means. But I couldn't let the knowledge die with me completely. I left a thread for someone to follow, if they cared enough to look." "What happened to you?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. "I stayed," she said simply. "When my term was up, I couldn't leave. This place had become part of me, or I had become part of it. So I stayed, in my own way. I became one of the memories that the keeper holds. And I've been here ever since, watching over the lighthouse, watching over the keepers who came after me, hoping one of them would understand as I understood." "You've been the light," I said, realizing. "All these years, it wasn't just the presence calling out. It was you, too, trying to guide the keepers to the truth." She smiled more fully now. "The presence and I are not so different. Both of us remember. Both of us keep watch. Together, we've tried to help those who came here to see truly, to understand what this place is and what it means. Most left too quickly, too frightened. Thomas Ashford almost succeeded, but fear overwhelmed him at the last moment. But you stayed. You listened. You read. You cared enough to understand." "I was just doing what felt right," I said. "That's all any of us can do," she replied. "But it's more than most. Manage. You'll be a good keeper. Better than good. This place has chosen you, as it once chose me. And I think—" She paused, looking around the cottage with something like nostalgia. "I think I can rest now, knowing it's in good hands, knowing the memory will continue." "Wait," I said, standing. "Don't go. There's so much I want to ask you, so much I want to know." But she was already fading, becoming less distinct, her smile the last thing visible before she disappeared entirely. And with her departure, I felt something shift in the cottage, in the island itself. A sense of completion, of a story finally finished, of a duty finally fulfilled. I sat back down at the table and continued writing in the logbook, documenting what I'd seen, what I'd learned. Future keepers would read this, I knew, and perhaps they, too, would come to understand what this place truly was: a keeper of memories, a guardian of the lost, a beacon not just for ships, but for souls. The northern lights continued their dance outside my window, and I felt the presence nearby, content and peaceful, no longer struggling to be heard. We were companions now, the presence and I, both doing the same work in different ways, both keeping the light, both remembering. Spring came slowly to Mercy Point, creeping in on gray mornings when the ice finally released its grip on the rocks, when the first seabirds returned to nest in the cliffs, when the quality of light shifted from winter's stark clarity to something softer, more forgiving. I planted a small garden in a sheltered spot near the cottage herbs and hardy vegetables that could withstand the salt spray and wind. It was a gesture of permanence, an acknowledgement that I was no longer just passing through. This was home. I continued my research into the island's history, and the more I learned, the more I understood. The presence beneath the lighthouse was not a single entity, but a collection, a repository of every memory of every soul that had passed through these waters. Sailors who had drowned in storms and whose names had been lost. Keepers who had served faithfully and been forgotten. Even the indigenous people who had first known this place as sacred, their memories too were held here, preserved in whatever consciousness dwelled in that sealed chamber. The lighthouse itself, I realized, was both a prison and a protection. It held the presence down, yes, but it also shielded it from the modern world that would not understand it, that would try to explain it away or exploit it or destroy it. The builders who had sealed the chamber had been acting out of fear, but perhaps their fear had inadvertently served a greater purpose. I began to think of myself not just as a lighthouse keeper, but as a guardian of something far older and more important. The beacon I tended guided ships safely past the rocks, but I also tended another kind of beacon, one that guided the lost and the forgotten back to remembrance, back to being known. On warm evenings, I would sit outside the cottage and watch the sun set over the water, turning the sea to molten copper, and I would feel the presence nearby, peaceful and content. Sometimes I would speak to it, telling it about my day, about the ships I'd seen, about the weather, and sometimes I would simply sit in companionable silence, two keepers together, watching over the same waters, remembering the same souls. Summer brought the occasional supply boat, and with it, news from the mainland. The harbor master would ask if I was ready to come back, if I'd had enough of the isolation. And each time I would tell him, no, not yet, just a little longer. The truth was, I couldn't imagine leaving. The isolation that might have driven others mad had become my peace, the solitude my sanctuary. I thought sometimes about the other keepers, about Samuel Oakes and his family, about Thomas Ashford fleeing in fear, about Margaret Chen, who had understood and stayed. We were all connected, now, all part of the same story, all remembered by the presence that dwelled beneath the tower. Our names were written in its memory, held safe, never to be truly lost. One night in July, during a warm spell, when the sea lay calm as glass and the stars blazed overhead with impossible brightness, I climbed to the glass room and sat with my back against the beacon mechanism, looking out at the universe reflected in the still water. The presence was particularly strong that night, almost visible, a shimmer in the air like heat waves rising from summer pavement. I understand now, I said to it. Why the keepers hear whispers, why you call their names. You're not trying to frighten them. You're trying to tell them they matter, that they're remembered, that their time here means something beyond just the mechanical tending of a light. The air shimmered more strongly, and I felt a warmth that was like approval, like affection. Margaret Chen found your name, I continued. But I don't think that's the only name you have. I think you have as many names as there are souls you remember. You are the sum of all of us, all the forgotten and the lost and the lonely, and that's what makes you holy. The shimmer coalesced into something almost like a form, tall and composed of countless overlapping shadows and lights, each one a memory, a name, a life that had touched these waters. It was beautiful and terrible and sad and hopeful all at once, and I understood why previous keepers had fled from it. It was too much, too vast, too profound to process without being changed by it. But I didn't want to flee. I wanted to sit with this enormity, to let it change me, to become part of the story it was telling. "Thank you," I said simply, "for letting me stay, for letting me remember with you." The form held for a moment longer, and then it gently dissolved back into the air, the shimmer fading until all that remained was the quiet night and the sound of my own breathing and the eternal whisper of the sea against the rocks. I descended the tower with a lightness in my step, feeling more at peace than I had in years. In the cottage, I made myself tea and sat at my table, opening the logbook to write the day's entry. But instead of the usual weather notations and ship sightings, I found myself writing something different. July 23rd. I have been keeper at Mercy Point for 10 months now, and I have learned what this place truly is. It is a threshold, a boundary place where memory and forgetting meet. The presence that dwells here is not a ghost or a demon or anything that our modern world has words for. It is simply the keeper of what would otherwise be lost. Every name that has been forgotten, every soul that drowned without witness, every keeper who served in solitude and obscurity, all are remembered here. All are held. And in that holding, they are loved. I count it the greatest honor of my life to tend this light, to serve alongside this ancient presence, to add my small memory to the vast collection of memories that make this island holy. I will stay as long as I am able, and when I am gone, I trust I will be remembered too. I signed my name, and as I did, I felt the presence close by, reading over my shoulder, adding my words to its collection, preserving this moment as it had preserved countless moments before. The seasons turned again. Summer faded into autumn. The garden I'd planted yielded its small harvest, and the storms returned with the shortening days. But I was ready for them now. The cottage was well maintained, the wood stove in good order, my supplies adequate. I had learned the rhythms of this place, had become part of its pattern. On the anniversary of my arrival, a gray September day, much like the one when I'd first stepped off the boat onto the island's small dock, I made a decision. I radioed the harbor master and told him I would be staying permanently, however long they would let me, until I was too old to climb the tower stairs, or until the lighthouse was finally decommissioned and torn down, or until I became like Margaret Chen, too much a part of this place to ever truly leave. He tried to talk me out of it, warned me about the isolation, the difficulty, the loneliness. But I just smiled and told him I wasn't lonely at all. I had the sea, the sky, the birds, the memories. I had the presence beneath the tower, my constant companion. I had the work, simple and profound, of keeping the light. What more could anyone need? Winter came, fierce and beautiful, and I weathered it with a contentment I'd never known before. The storms that had once frightened me now felt like music, the wind and waves composing endless symphonies against the rocks. The presence and I would sit together on the longest nights, keeping watch, remembering, holding space for all the lost souls who had ever sailed these waters. I thought often about memory during those dark months, about how we are all just collections of moments, experiences, names that we carry with us, and that others carry for us. When we're forgotten, truly forgotten, with no one left who remembers our names or our faces or the small details of our lives, do we cease to exist in any meaningful way? Or does some part of us persist, held in places like this, in the memory of the earth itself, of the sea, of whatever consciousness watches over the boundaries between being and unbeing? The presence had an answer to this, I thought. It existed as pure memory, pure preservation. As long as it endured, nothing was truly lost. Every sailor who had gone down in these waters, every keeper who had served, every person who had stood on this rock and looked out at the endless sea, all were held, all were known, all were loved. And now I was part of that collection. My name, my story, my small contribution to the ongoing tale of Mercy Point. When I was gone, I would be remembered, not by family or friends, perhaps, but by something older and more enduring. By the island itself, by the presence, by whatever comes after. The knowledge brought me peace. Spring returned, as it always does, and with it came a surprise. A boat arrived on a mild morning in March, and from it stepped a young woman with nervous eyes and 2 heavy suitcases. The harbor master had sent her, she explained, as my assistant. Someone to help with the maintenance, to learn the work, to ensure continuity when I eventually had to leave. I welcomed her, of course, showed her the cottage's spare room, introduced her to the rhythms of the work. Her name was Sarah, and she was running from something in her past life, seeking the same solitude I'd once sought. I recognized the look in her eyes, the desperate need for quiet, for distance, for a place to hide and heal. That first week, she was nervous, jumpy, starting at every sound. But gradually, she began to relax, to find comfort in the simplicity of the work, the endlessness of the sea. We fell into an easy partnership, dividing the tasks, sharing meals, talking sometimes and sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. I didn't tell her about the presence right away. I wanted her to discover it on her own, to come to it without preconceptions or fear. And, sure enough, on her 10th night on the island, she came to me at breakfast with questions. "Did you see the light last night?" she asked. "In the tower?" "What kind of light?" I asked, though I knew. "I don't know." "It was moving, like someone was up there with a lamp. But you were here, weren't you? You didn't go out?" "I was here all night," I confirmed. "What did the light do?" She described it, the movement through the glass room, the descent down the stairs, the progression toward the cottage. She hadn't opened the door, she said. She'd been too frightened, but she'd watched the glow beneath the door for hours until it finally faded. I nodded, set down my tea, and said, "There's something you should know about this place." And so I told her about the presence, about the sealed chamber, about the memories it held, about Margaret Chen and Samuel Oakes and all the keepers who had come before, about what it meant to serve here, to be guardian not just of a light but of something far more precious and strange. She listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider but not, I was relieved to see, more frightened. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, staring out the window at the tower. "So we're not alone here," she finally said. "No," I agreed. "We're never alone here. But that's not a bad thing. Once you understand what it is, once you learn to see it as a companion rather than a threat, it becomes comforting. Knowing that nothing is truly forgotten, that everyone matters, that all our names are held somewhere safe." She nodded slowly. "Can I read the logs, the old ones?" "Of course," I said. "They're in the tower. Take your time with them. Read as much or as little as you want. And when you're ready, we'll go together, and I'll introduce you properly." Over the following weeks, Sarah read the logbooks, just as I had, tracing the history of the lighthouse and its keepers. I watched her go through the same journey I'd experienced. Confusion, fear, understanding, acceptance, and finally, On a calm night in April, when the moon was full and the sea was silver, I took her to the tower, to the glass room where the presence was strongest. We sat together in that circular space, the beacon rotating slowly above us, casting its light across the water in steady sweeps. And we waited. After a time, the air began to shimmer, and the presence made itself known, not as dramatically as it once had for me, but gently, welcoming, as if greeting an old friend. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, and I squeezed it reassuringly. "It's okay," I whispered. "Just acknowledge it. Let it know you see it, that you understand." She took a shaky breath and spoke aloud. "I see you. I understand. Thank you for remembering." The shimmer intensified briefly, warmly, and then settled into a comfortable presence, like a third person sitting with us in companionable silence. We stayed there for hours, the three of us, two living keepers, and one that existed beyond such simple categories, watching over the sea together, holding space for the memories that gathered here like morning fog. When we finally descended to the cottage, Sarah was smiling. "I understand now," she said, "why you stay, why you'll never leave." "Yes," I agreed. "This is where we belong. We're part of the story now, part of what's remembered." And so the seasons continue their endless turning. Sarah and I tend the light together, maintaining the equipment, filing the reports, performing the small rituals that keep a lighthouse functioning. But we also tend to the older duty, the deeper work. We remember. We acknowledge. We bear witness to the presence that dwells beneath our feet and holds in its vast consciousness every soul that has ever known these waters. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, we'll see other presences gathered near the tower. Shadows that might be the keepers who came before, or the sailors who were lost to storms, or the indigenous peoples who first knew this island as holy ground. They come and go like tides, remembered and remembering, part of the endless cycle of this threshold place. And someday, when my time here is done, I will join them. My name will be added to the vast collection held in the sealed chamber beneath the lighthouse. Future keepers will read my words in the logbook, will learn about the presence, will come to understand what this place truly is. And I will be remembered, held safe, never truly lost. Until then, I keep the light. I watch the sea. I remember and am remembered. The work continues, simple and profound, endless as the waves that break upon these ancient rocks. And I am content. The lighthouse stands white against the sky, its beacon turning through the darkness, guiding ships safely past the dangerous rocks. But it serves another purpose too, one that the builders never intended and that most will never know. It is a marker, a memorial, a promise that nothing is ever truly forgotten. As long as the light burns, the memories endure. As long as the tower stands, the keeper remembers. And as long as there are souls who care enough to listen, to acknowledge, to bear witness, the presence beneath will continue its ancient work, holding every name, every story, every life that has touched these waters. This is Mercy Point. This is the island of memory, and I am honored beyond measure to serve as its keeper, to add my small light to the greater light that has burned here since long before the tower was built, and will burn long after it has crumbled back to stone. The sea whispers its eternal song against the rocks. The wind carries the names of the forgotten. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. And here, on this small island at the edge of the world, the work of remembering continues, always, forever, until the last light fades and the last name is spoken, and the last soul finds its way home through the darkness.